"Ma'am, that helmet looks like it already quit." Recruit Dylan Parker said it loud enough for the entire equipment inspection room to hear, and the laugh that followed came fast, nervous, and young. The morning had started like every other training day at Naval Training Center Great Lakes, with polished boots on waxed floors, new gloves stacked beside new helmets, and rows of recruits trying to look more experienced than they were. Everything smelled faintly of rubber, coffee, and floor cleaner. The recruits stood beside long metal tables under bright fluorescent lights, each one waiting for a senior instructor to check their gear before the day's drills began. Most of the helmets on the tables looked nearly identical, clean black shells with fresh straps and clean markings, issued from the same supply cage less than a week earlier. Then Lieutenant Commander Avery Collins walked in carrying one that did not belong with the others. Her helmet was old, matte gray, and worn along the edges. A thin crack ran down the left side like a pale lightning mark, stopping just above a small silver falcon emblem fixed near the rim. The emblem was scratched, but not loose. The chin strap had been replaced at least once. The inner padding looked carefully maintained, not neglected. To someone who knew nothing, it looked damaged. To Avery, it looked like a promise that had survived the worst day of somebody's life. She stood at the end of the table in a clean navy working uniform, her posture straight, her face calm, her pale skin touched by the soft blue-white light overhead. She was 37, beautiful in a way that did not ask for attention, with gray-blue eyes that stayed steady on whatever mattered and ignored whatever did not. Her light brown hair was pulled into a regulation bun, and her uniform held no decoration that shouted for praise. Only the quiet discipline in her movements suggested that she had spent years in places where panic could not be allowed to enter the room. Dylan Parker did not see any of that. He was 21, broad-shouldered, fresh from early training, and still addicted to the approval of the recruits standing near him. He leaned closer to the helmet, grinning as if he had found the easiest target in the room. "Seriously," he said, tapping the table beside it, but not the helmet itself. "Did supply run out of real gear? Or is this some kind of museum piece?" A few recruits laughed again, softer this time. Avery placed the helmet on the table with both hands. She did not slam it down. She did not hide it. She set it there the way someone might set down a folded flag, careful not because it was fragile, but because it meant something. "It stayed longer than most people would have," she said. Her voice was low, measured, almost gentle. That should have been enough to end it. Instead, Dylan heard restraint and mistook it for embarrassment. He crossed his arms and looked around, inviting the room to stay with him. "Come on, ma'am. You cannot expect recruits to take equipment standards seriously when an officer walks in with a cracked helmet." The word cracked seemed to hang in the air longer than the others. Avery's eyes lowered to the mark on the helmet's side, the silver falcon catching the overhead light for half a second. Her thumb moved once along the edge of the crack, stopping before it reached the emblem. Something passed through her face, not pain, not anger, but memory kept under military control. Then it was gone. She looked back at Dylan. Some damage is not failure. The room grew quieter. A recruit at the next table stopped smiling. Another looked down at his own brand-new helmet, suddenly unsure whether new meant better. Dylan shifted his weight, still trying to hold the room. Sounds like something people say when they do not want to replace broken gear. Avery did not answer right away. She turned the helmet slightly, angling the inside away from the recruits, shielding something they had not yet noticed. That small movement made Dylan's eyes narrow. He had come looking for a joke. Now he thought he had found a secret. Outside the inspection room, boots moved down the hallway in slow, heavy steps, but no one inside paid attention yet. All eyes remained on the cracked helmet, the silver falcon, and the quiet officer who seemed less interested in defending herself than in protecting the story from people who had not earned it. The heavy footsteps in the hallway passed by without entering, and the inspection room remained locked inside the moment Dylan Parker had created. Avery Collins kept one hand near the cracked helmet, not covering it, not displaying it, simply keeping it within reach. Around her, the recruits stood in neat rows with equipment so new it still looked untouched by weather, pressure, or consequence. Their helmets were smooth. Their straps were clean. Their gloves had no creases where nervous fingers had worked them over during long waits. Everything on their tables spoke of beginnings. Avery's helmet spoke of something that had already happened and refused to be forgotten. Dylan leaned on that difference because it made him feel clever. Look, I get it, he said, letting his voice carry just enough for the group. Maybe officers keep old gear for motivation. Maybe it has sentimental value. But there is a difference between memories and standards. A few recruits glanced toward Avery, expecting her to correct him with rank or volume. She did neither. She lifted the helmet and checked the chin strap with practiced fingers, pulling the webbing once, testing the buckle, reading its condition by feel. Then she turned it slightly and examined the inner padding, her eyes moving with quiet precision. To the younger recruits, it looked like a routine inspection. To anyone who had spent time around damaged things that still worked, it looked like respect. Standards are not about shine, Avery said. They are about trust. Dylan gave a short laugh. Trusting a cracked helmet sounds like a bad idea, ma'am. Avery looked at him then. Not sharply, not with anger, just fully. The room seemed to notice the difference. Trusting your first impression can be worse. The sentence landed cleanly. One recruit near the center table lowered his eyes to hide a smile, not at Avery, but at Dylan's sudden stillness. Dylan felt it and pushed back. He was not a cruel young man, not deep down, but he was too new to understand how pride could turn ordinary people careless. He had grown up in Ohio, the son of a retired firefighter who taught him to polish boots, shake hands firmly, and never be the quietest person in a room if he wanted to be noticed. The Navy had given Dylan structure, but it had not yet given him wisdom. He still thought confidence and competence were the same thing. Avery recognized that too. She had seen it before in fresh faces at every base. Young service members mistaking volume for courage and clean gear for readiness. Most of them learned. Some learned gently. Some needed the room to go silent first. The inspection continued around them, but slower now. A petty officer at the far end checked serial numbers without looking up. Recruits adjusted straps and opened gear bags while listening with the careful attention of people pretending not to listen. Avery placed the helmet back on the table and turned the cracked side toward herself again. The small silver falcon emblem rested near her left hand, dull from age, its wings still visible beneath scratches. Dylan noticed how deliberately she kept the inside hidden. Curiosity sharpened his expression. "What is inside it?" he asked. Avery closed the strap across the front. "Nothing you need for inspection." "Then why hide it?" The words came faster than he intended, and the room tightened around them. Avery's face remained still, but her eyes changed by a fraction. Because not every mark is for public discussion. Dylan folded his arms again, trying to recover the easy grin he had started with. "That is convenient." Avery did not answer. She reached into her gear bag and removed a folded cloth, wiping dust from the helmet's edge with slow, careful strokes. Each movement made the recruits watch more closely. The crack was not jagged now that they looked at it. It had been sealed, reinforced from the inside, preserved rather than ignored. The helmet was not abandoned equipment. It had been maintained like evidence. Dylan saw that and still chose the wrong road. "If it is not a problem," he said, "then show us." Avery set the cloth down. Outside the room, the footsteps returned, slower this time. The air shifted before the door opened, as if experience had entered before the man himself. Avery heard it. Her hand paused on the helmet. She did not look toward the hallway. She only said, quietly enough that Dylan almost missed it, "Careful, recruit. Some questions answer more than you are ready to hear." The door opened before Dylan could answer, and Master Chief William Hart stepped into the inspection room with the kind of quiet authority that made young recruits straighten before they understood why. He was 58, white-haired at the temples, square-shouldered, and weathered by 3 decades of service that had carved patience into his face without softening his eyes. The room snapped to attention almost by instinct. Dylan turned quickly, his confidence rearranging itself into military posture. Avery did not move much. She was already standing the way Hart expected professionals to stand, balanced, still, ready without performance. Master Chief Hart glanced across the rows of new helmets, new gloves, and nervous young faces. Then his eyes settled on Avery's helmet. The change in him was small, but everyone saw it because the room had become too quiet to hide anything. His gaze moved to the crack on the left side, then to the silver falcon near the rim, then to Avery. He did not smile. He did not greet her casually. He looked at the helmet as if the years had suddenly folded inward and placed him somewhere else. Avery gave him the faintest nod. Master Chief. Hart answered after half a beat. Commander Collins. Dylan looked between them, trying to read what he had walked into. He expected Hart to correct Avery for carrying worn gear, or at least ask why it was on the inspection table. Instead, the old Master Chief stepped closer with careful slowness, like a man approaching a memory that deserved room. He stopped at the edge of the table and looked down at the helmet. I have not seen that mark in a long time, he said. The recruits shifted slightly. The Silver Falcon no longer looked like decoration under his stare. It looked like something with a name. Dylan swallowed but held his ground. Master Chief, I was just asking why the commander brought damaged equipment to inspection. Hart did not look at him right away. Were you asking? Dylan hesitated. Yes, Master Chief. Or were you laughing? The question was flat, not angry, and that made it worse. Dylan's ears reddened. A few recruits dropped their eyes. Avery looked at the helmet, not at Dylan. She seemed almost willing the moment to pass without opening the door any farther. Hart noticed that too. Commander, he said quietly, is the inside still marked? Avery's fingers rested on the helmet's edge. For the first time that morning, hesitation entered her movements. It was not fear. It was the reluctance of someone who had guarded a story for so long that even respect felt intrusive. Yes, she said. Hart nodded once. May I? Avery paused, then turned the helmet toward him. She did not hand it over. She simply rotated it enough for the inner rim to catch the overhead light. Dylan leaned forward before he could stop himself. Inside, beneath the reinforced lining and beside a strip of faded tape, a line had been etched into the material in small block letters. Rescue date. September 14th, 2012. Below it was another tiny mark, the same Silver Falcon, drawn by hand and sealed beneath clear resin. Dylan read the date silently at first, then gave a short, uncertain laugh because he still did not know what else to do. Rescue date, he said, trying to keep the joke alive. So it is a souvenir? The temperature of the room seemed to drop. Master Chief Hart turned his head slowly. His eyes found Dylan and stayed there. Recruit Parker, he said, voice low enough to make everyone listen harder. Read that date again. Dylan's smile disappeared. September 14th, 2012. Hart stood straighter. So did Avery, though she looked as if she wished she could disappear into silence. The Master Chief removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them in his breast pocket. That date, he said, is why 6 sailors came home. That date is why 6 sailors came home. The sentence did not need volume. It moved through the inspection room with the weight of a ship bell in fog, slow, clear, impossible to ignore. Dylan Parker stood beside the table with his shoulders still squared, but the pride in his face had begun to loosen. He looked at the helmet again, at the thin crack down the left side, at the Silver Falcon near the rim, at the etched date inside that he had treated like a joke only seconds before. Nothing about the object had changed. Only his understanding had started to. Master Chief William Hart turned the helmet slightly toward the recruits, careful not to lift it from the table without Avery's permission. This was not a souvenir, he said. It was not decoration. It was not some old piece of gear kept around because someone liked the way it looked. Avery's eyes stayed on the floor, just beyond the table. Her face remained composed, but the stillness around her had become different. Earlier, it had looked like discipline. Now it looked like protection. She had protected the helmet from careless hands, but more than that, she had protected the memory inside it from careless words. Hart continued, each sentence measured. On September 14th, 2012, a training exercise off the coast of North Carolina turned into a rescue operation after weather shifted faster than expected. Visibility dropped. Communications became unreliable. The water was rough, and timing mattered. 6 sailors were separated from the main recovery point. The situation demanded calm, coordination, and someone willing to stay focused after the easy part of the plan was gone. No one moved. The recruits who had been checking straps and serial numbers stood frozen beside their tables. The helmets in front of them looked suddenly too clean, too untouched, too innocent. Dylan kept his eyes on Hart, but his face had gone pale beneath the room's fluorescent light. He had heard rescue stories before in training videos, always trimmed into clean lessons with diagrams and calm narration. This was different. This story stood in front of him wearing a quiet face and a uniform that asked for nothing. Hart looked at Avery, and his voice softened without losing command. Commander Collins was a junior officer then. She was part of the response team assigned to maintain search coordination and guide recovery crews through changing conditions. She did not have the easiest position. She had the one that required everyone else to trust her voice when the weather made trust difficult. Avery's hand closed lightly around the edge of the table. It was the only movement she allowed herself. A memory crossed her eyes, and for half a second the inspection room seemed very far away. In her mind, there was gray water, low cloud cover, a radio channel breaking in and out, and a young voice trying not to sound afraid. She remembered counting seconds between reports. She remembered repeating coordinates until her throat felt raw. She remembered telling others to breathe because panic spreads faster than bad weather if no one stops it. She remembered the impact that cracked the helmet, not as drama, but as a hard interruption in a long day of refusing to quit. Then she was back under the fluorescent lights, older now, quieter, still standing. Hart did not describe the danger in detail. He did not need to. He gave only what the room had earned. That helmet was damaged during the operation, he said. It was repaired enough to preserve, not to reuse. The Falcon mark was placed there by the rescue team afterward. They called her Falcon because she kept eyes on people the weather tried to hide. Dylan looked down. The joke he had made now seemed to sit between him and the table like something heavy. Master Chief, he said, but the words failed after that. Hart faced him fully. Recruit Parker, you laughed because you saw a crack and assumed weakness. That is a dangerous habit in uniform. Dylan's throat moved. Yes, Master Chief. Avery finally looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the kind of calm that made anger unnecessary. Hart rested one hand near the helmet, still not touching the silver Falcon. Some marks mean equipment failed. Some marks mean a person held the line long enough for others to make it home. The room absorbed the words slowly. Dylan's eyes returned to the date inside the helmet. September 14th, 2012. It was no longer a marking. It was a threshold, and he had stepped across it laughing. The room did not recover all at once. It returned in small movements, one recruit lowering his eyes to his own helmet, another quietly setting a pair of gloves down, a petty officer at the far end stopping mid-check with a pen held over a clipboard. Dylan Parker remained still beside Avery Collins's table, staring at the etched date until the numbers seemed to push every easy joke out of him. September 14th, 2012. A few minutes earlier, it had been nothing to him but a strange marking inside old gear. Now it carried weather, voices, responsibility, and 6 names he did not know but suddenly felt unqualified to speak over. Master Chief Hart let the silence work. He had spent enough years training young sailors to understand that some lessons lost power when explained too quickly. Shame could become resentment if handled carelessly. Respect, if given room, could become discipline. Avery reached for the helmet, and every pair of eyes followed her hand. She turned it back toward herself, not to hide the date this time, but to close the memory with dignity. Her fingers moved along the repaired edge, stopping near the Falcon mark. Master Chief, she said quietly, they do not need the whole story. Hart looked at her for a long moment. No, Commander, but they needed enough of it. Dylan swallowed. The sound was small, but in the quiet room it felt loud. He tried to stand taller, though his confidence had changed shape. It no longer looked like performance. It looked like a young man realizing that the uniform he wore was heavier than he had understood that morning. Commander Collins, he said, then stopped because her rank no longer felt like a formality. Avery looked at him. Her gray-blue eyes were steady, not warm exactly, but fair. That made the apology harder. He could have handled anger. He could have pushed back against humiliation. Fairness left him nothing to fight. I was wrong, Dylan said. I spoke without knowing. I made light of something I did not understand. Avery did not answer immediately. She let the words stand between them until they became more than a reaction to being corrected. Hart watched from the side, arms relaxed, face unreadable. The recruits watched too, not because they wanted Dylan embarrassed, but because they were learning what accountability looked like when no one shouted. Finally, Avery said, "You saw damage and decided it meant failure." Dylan nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. That will get people hurt in small ways before it ever gets them hurt in big ones." The sentence moved through the room like a rule written somewhere deeper than a manual. Avery lifted the helmet with both hands. The crack ran pale beneath the light, sealed but visible, impossible to pretend away. In this job, you will see people with scars in their gear, in their records, in their voices, in the way they stand near doors or check exits without thinking. Some of them will be your leaders. Some will be your teammates. Some will be the reason you get home on a day you never see coming. Dylan's face tightened, not from defense, but from understanding arriving late. Yes, ma'am. Avery set the helmet down again, gentler than before. Do not make them prove their pain before you offer respect. The words did what the crack had done all morning. They stayed. No one moved for a full breath. Then Master Chief Hart turned toward the entire room. Inspection continues in 2 minutes, he said. And when it does, I expect every recruit in here to check their gear like it may one day carry a story somebody else is not mature enough to understand. Chairs did not scrape. No one laughed. The recruits reached for straps, buckles, and helmets with new care. Dylan stayed where he was, eyes on Avery's helmet. Then, slowly, he brought his hand up in a clean salute. Not rushed, not theatrical, not because someone had ordered it, because the date had finally reached him. Dylan Parker held the salute longer than anyone expected. His fingers were straight, his elbows sharp, his eyes fixed not on the cracked helmet anymore, but on Lieutenant Commander Avery Collins. The room seemed to understand that the salute was not for rank alone. It was for the story he had stepped on before he knew its shape. Avery stood across from him in the fluorescent light, one hand resting beside the helmet, the other relaxed at her side. She did not rush to return the gesture. She let him feel the weight of it first. A salute given too quickly can become habit. A salute earned after understanding becomes a promise. At last, Avery brought her hand up and returned it with quiet precision. No drama, no speech, just the clean exchange of respect between someone who had carried the past and someone finally learning how to stand properly before it. Dylan lowered his hand only after she did. His face no longer held the easy grin from earlier. He looked younger now, but not weaker. There was a difference. Master Chief Hart saw it and gave the smallest nod, the kind that meant the lesson had landed. Around the room, the inspection resumed, but nothing felt routine anymore. Recruits checked buckles with slower hands. They tested straps twice. They looked at scuffs differently. A small scratch on a helmet no longer seemed like an imperfection to mock. It seemed like a question worth asking with care. Avery lifted her helmet and placed it inside a padded gear bag, leaving the silver falcon visible for one final second before the flap covered it. Dylan watched the motion, then stepped back to his own table. His helmet sat there untouched, black, clean, and new. He picked it up with both hands instead of one. He checked the chin strap, then the inner lining, then the shell, not because anyone was watching, but because for the first time that morning he understood that equipment was not just issued. It was trusted. Master Chief Hart moved down the line, inspecting in silence. When he reached Dylan, he stopped. Dylan stood straight. Gear status, Recruit Parker? Hart asked. Dylan looked down at his helmet, then back up. Serviceable, Master Chief. Checked fully. Hart studied him for a beat. And your judgment? Dylan did not flinch. Under correction, Master Chief. A few recruits heard it. No one laughed. Hart almost smiled, but not quite. Good. Keep it that way. Across the room, Avery paused near the door. She looked back once, not at Dylan alone, but at the entire line of recruits. Their posture had changed. Not perfectly, not permanently maybe, but enough for a beginning. Outside the inspection room, the hallway stretched toward the training yard, where morning light waited beyond the glass doors. The day's drills would continue. Orders would be given. Mistakes would be made. Lessons would be repeated until they became muscle memory. That was how the military worked. Not every lesson came from hardship. Some came from a cracked helmet on a metal table and a recruit brave enough, after being wrong, to stand corrected. Avery turned to leave, but Dylan spoke one more time. Commander Collins. She stopped without facing him. Yes, recruit. His voice was quieter now. I will remember the date. Avery looked over her shoulder. The faintest change touched her expression, not quite a smile, but close enough to feel human. Remember what it means, she said. Then she walked into the hallway, carrying the helmet that had outlived a storm, a joke, and another young man's certainty. Behind her, the recruits returned to their gear with the kind of silence that was not empty. It was respect beginning to take shape. And from that morning on, Dylan Parker never laughed at worn equipment again. When he saw cracks, dents, faded tape, or old markings. He looked closer. Because some things are not broken because they failed. Some things are marked because someone held the line long enough for others to come home. By the time Avery Collins reached the training yard, the morning had changed color. The sun had climbed above the low buildings, spreading clean light across the painted lines, obstacle stations, and flagpole at the center of the compound. Recruits were already forming outside in small groups, helmets tucked under their arms, voices lower than usual after what had happened in the inspection room. Avery walked along the edge of the yard with the padded gear bag in her left hand, the old helmet resting inside, like a sealed chapter. She had planned to leave the instructors to their work and disappear back into the quiet spaces of the base where no one asked questions. That was how she preferred it. Her job was not to be remembered. Her job was to make sure others learned before the day came when learning was no longer comfortable. Master Chief Hart joined her near the flagpole, walking with the slow confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove. For a while, neither of them spoke. They watched the recruits move into formation, some still carrying their new gear with more care than they had an hour earlier. "You handled him better than I would have," Hart said. Avery looked across the yard. Dylan Parker stood in the second row, shoulders square, chin level, eyes forward. He was not trying to draw attention now. That alone was progress. "He is young," Avery said. Hart gave a dry breath that was almost a laugh. "Young is not an excuse." "No," she said, "but it is a window. You correct them while it is still open." Hart studied her for a moment. "You always did believe in giving people one more chance than they deserved." Avery's hand tightened briefly around the strap of the gear bag. "Someone gave me one." The Master Chief did not ask who. He knew better. In front of them, the lead instructor called the recruits to attention and began outlining the morning's equipment movement drill. It was simple on paper. Carry gear across the yard, organize by team, check every piece, report status, and move again under time pressure. No danger. No heroics. Just discipline, awareness, and accountability. The kind of task young recruits underestimated because no one was shouting about courage. Dylan listened differently this time. When the drill began, his team moved fast, maybe too fast. A recruit beside him nearly missed a loose strap hanging from a gear bundle. Earlier that morning, Dylan might have ignored it, eager to finish first. This time he stopped. "Check that," he said. The other recruit frowned. "We are losing time." Dylan looked at the strap, then at him. "Then lose 5 seconds. Not the standard." Avery heard it from across the yard. She did not turn her head much, but Hart saw the corner of her mouth soften by a fraction. The team fixed the strap and moved on. They did not finish first. They finished clean. When they reported, Dylan did not exaggerate or make excuses. He stood in front of the instructor and said, "Team 2 complete. 1 strap corrected during movement. No missing gear." The instructor marked the clipboard and nodded. "Good correction." It was a small moment. Almost nothing. But Avery had learned that most military careers turned on small moments long before the large ones arrived. A joke not made. A detail not missed. A question asked with respect instead of pride. She looked down at the padded bag and opened it just enough to see the dull curve of the old helmet inside. The silver falcon rested in shadow, quiet again. Hart followed her gaze. "Still think they did not need the whole story?" he asked. Avery zipped the bag closed. "They need to become the kind of people who would deserve it." The flag above them snapped in the wind. Across the yard, Dylan picked up his helmet with both hands, no longer treating it like issued plastic and straps, but like something that might one day carry the weight of his own choices. Avery watched him for one more second, then looked toward the open training field beyond the fence. The lesson was no longer hers alone. It had moved, quietly, from the crack in an old helmet into the hands of a recruit who had finally learned to look closer. The training yard settled into a rhythm that did not look dramatic from a distance, but Avery Collins knew better than to trust distance. From the edge of the field, the drill seemed simple. Recruits moving gear, checking straps, reporting status, correcting mistakes, repeating the sequence until speed and discipline stopped fighting each other. Up close, it was where character began to show. Some recruits rushed and had to start over. Some blamed the equipment. Some blamed the clock. A few adjusted, learned, and improved without being told twice. Dylan Parker was one of them now. Not perfect, not transformed into a veteran by one hard lesson, but different in a way that mattered. He stopped laughing at the wrong times. He stopped speaking before looking. When another recruit complained about a scratched helmet, Dylan glanced at him once and said, "Check it first." No speech, no performance, just the new standard leaving his mouth before pride could get in the way. Master Chief Hart heard it and kept walking, but Avery saw the old man's shoulders shift with quiet approval. The morning drill ended near noon, with the sun high above the compound and heat rising from the painted concrete in thin waves. The recruits formed up near the flagpole, tired but attentive, helmets held at their sides. The lead instructor gave a short review, naming missed steps, corrected errors, and the importance of reporting facts without excuses. Then Hart stepped forward. The yard went still. "This morning," he said, "some of you learned that gear has history. More important, you learned that people do too." Avery stood off to the side, half in the shade of the administration building, the padded gear bag resting by her boot. She had not expected Hart to bring the lesson outside. She should have known he would. Master Chiefs did not let good teaching moments go unused. Hart looked across the formation. A uniform does not make you wise. New equipment does not make you ready. Loud confidence does not make you a leader. What makes you useful in this service is the ability to correct yourself before someone else pays for your certainty. Dylan stood in the second row, eyes forward. The word struck him, but he did not flinch. That mattered too. A man who could accept correction without making himself the victim had taken his first step away from being dangerous to his own team. Hart turned slightly toward Avery, but he did not expose her to the yard more than necessary. Some of the strongest people you will meet will not tell you what they survived. They will not owe you the story behind every mark, every scar, every faded piece of gear. Your job is not to force the story out of them. Your job is to become disciplined enough to respect what you do not yet understand. The recruits listened in a silence that felt earned. Avery looked at the line of young faces and saw what she had seen for years. Fear hidden under confidence, ambition hidden under jokes, good intentions waiting for discipline to shape them into something useful. She did not resent them for being unfinished. Everyone in uniform had been unfinished once. The question was whether they would let the service make them better or only let it make them louder. After dismissal, the formation broke with less noise than usual. Dylan waited until the others moved toward the water station, then approached Avery and stopped at a proper distance. He did not salute this time, because the moment did not call for display. He simply stood straight and said, "Commander, permission to ask one question." Avery looked at him. "Ask." Dylan's eyes moved briefly to the gear bag, then back to her face. "How do you know when something damaged is still worth keeping?" Avery followed his glance to the bag. For a moment, the yard faded again, and the old helmet seemed heavier than its weight. "When it still teaches the right lesson," she said. Dylan nodded slowly. "And if it teaches pain?" Avery's expression remained calm, but her voice softened by a degree. "Then you carry it carefully, not loudly." Dylan absorbed that, then gave a respectful nod and stepped back. Avery watched him rejoin his team. He picked up a water bottle someone else had dropped, handed it over without comment, and moved on. A small thing, almost invisible, but Avery had built her faith in people on small things. She lifted the padded bag and turned toward the building. Behind her, the recruits prepared for the afternoon drill under the hard noon light. Ahead of her, the hallway waited, quiet and cool. The helmet inside the bag did not need to be displayed anymore. The date had done its work. By late afternoon, the training center had quieted into that brief hour between drills and evening formation, when the day's noise faded, but its lessons still lingered in the air. Avery Collins returned to the equipment inspection room alone. The fluorescent lights were off now, leaving the space lit by soft amber sunlight through the high windows. The long metal tables stood empty except for a few inventory tags, a forgotten pencil, and faint marks where helmets had rested that morning. She set the padded gear bag on the table and opened it with the same care she had shown before anyone knew why. The old helmet sat inside, matte gray, cracked along the left side, the silver falcon dim in the fading light. Avery lifted it out and held it for a moment, not like a relic, not like a trophy, but like a responsibility that had never fully left her hands. Behind her, the door opened quietly. She did not turn. "Master Chief," she said. William Hart stepped in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "Still hearing them?" Avery looked at the helmet. "Sometimes." Hart placed one cup near her and leaned against the edge of the next table. They heard you today. Avery's thumb rested near the sealed crack. They heard the date. That is enough for recruits. She was quiet for a while. Outside, somewhere beyond the building, a whistle blew and boots moved across pavement in formation. Young voices answered a command in uneven rhythm, still learning how to become one sound. Avery listened until the steps faded. Dylan will be all right, Hart said. Avery looked toward the door. If he remembers before he speaks. He will. Hart took a slow sip of coffee. Not because we embarrassed him. Because you did not. Avery let that settle. She had seen plenty of young service members corrected into silence and learn nothing but resentment. Dylan had been given something harder and better. He had been allowed to become responsible for his own mistake. That kind of lesson could last if pride did not bury it. Across the compound, Dylan Parker stood outside the barracks with his helmet tucked under one arm. Another recruit pointed at a faded strap on an older instructor's gear and started to make a joke. Dylan looked at him, not harshly, not loudly, and said, "Do not." The other recruit frowned. "What?" Dylan adjusted his grip on his helmet. "You do not know what it has been through." The words were simple, but they changed the space around them. The other recruit glanced at the gear again and said nothing. Dylan looked toward the administration building, where Avery had disappeared with the old helmet. He did not see her through the window. He did not need to. The date had stayed with him. September 14th, 2012. Not as a number to repeat for effect, but as a reminder that every mark might have a reason, and every quiet person might be carrying a chapter no one else had earned the right to read. Inside the inspection room, Avery placed the helmet back into the padded bag. Hart watched her zip it closed. "You ever think about retiring it somewhere official?" he asked. Avery considered that. A display case. A plaque. A clean label that would explain just enough for strangers to nod and move on. She shook her head. "Not yet." Hart raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Avery picked up the bag and slung it over her shoulder. The silver falcon disappeared beneath the canvas, but the weight of it remained. "Because it is still teaching." Hart smiled then, small and proud. They walked out together into the evening light. Across the yard, recruits moved into formation with their helmets held properly, straps checked, eyes forward. Dylan stood among them, quieter than he had been that morning and stronger for it. When Avery passed, he brought his posture a little straighter, not asking for attention, not trying to prove anything, simply showing that he remembered. Avery gave the smallest nod and kept walking. The flag above the yard snapped once in the lake wind. The day ended without applause, without speeches, without anyone needing to say the lesson again. Some things are not broken because they failed. Some things are marked because someone held the line long enough for others to come home.